Good morning, friends. Good to see your faces and your smile. I survived the bike ride. Yes, thank you. I think. The psalm today says, sing a new song, but I want to sing an old song. And it's a song that came to mind in reading the readings today. Some of you may know this. It goes, love, 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 love. Christians, this is your call. Love your neighbor as yourself, for God loves all. Anybody know that? Remember that? Summer camp, yeah. So it's a round. So maybe we'll sing it in a round later. And it changes over time, you know. Sometimes those camp songs, they get old, right? How many times can you sing about love? Debbie Thomas was talking about in the Journey with Jesus today, this week, about driving home after church and asking the kids, okay, what was the sermon about? And they would say, it was about love. Anything else? No, Mom, it was about love. It's about love every week. But sometimes our efforts at that get old, get tired, kind of like singing an old song, and the words change over time because they're not necessarily as good as they could be. Love, love, love. Christians, this is your call, was changed at one time to people, this is your call, to make the point that it's not just Christians that are called to love, right? It's everybody. But sometimes we get tired by taking that in and living that out, kind of like the prayer flags that have hung on the patio here all through the pandemic. They're getting sun-bleached and faded, fatigued, like us, perhaps, old and tired. So on this Mother's Day weekend, in which John's Gospel speaks about love so much, I want to talk more about it, because Jesus seemed to talk about love again and again and again. And I want to share with you what I love, and I'm using the present tense because love is eternal, what I love about my own mother, who died in 2004. Number one, her empathy. Her own strong ability to love. She was just a caring, compassionate person, unconditionally caring for those around her. She had enough heartbreak, I think, in her life to treasure empathy for others. With 8 kids, right? Seven sons. Oftentimes, the girlfriends of my brothers, possibly me as well, post-breakup, would come back and visit my mother. She was that kind of person. But here's the thing, too. She was able to communicate her empathy. We all can feel empathy. But how do we communicate our empathy? How do we share it? Jesus was a communicator. He didn't just walk around being a good person. He talked about love. He communicated about love. And he called people out when they were not loving. So I want to share some stories as I talk about my mom from the news that I saw this week. And the first one is a story about R.J. Johnson, who it turned into a gospel hymn and is sung in gospel churches. I just learned about it this week. The story of a 13-year-old boy. The family's having a guest over, and so it's time to get ready, clean up the house, and get ready for having a guest. And the boy is not into it, shall we say. And so his mother makes this clear that she needs his help. And he's not having it. But later, a couple days later, the mother realizes that he's done everything she asked him to do, and she just walks into his room with a smile on her face. He's not there, but she sees a note on the dresser, and the note says, cutting grass, $20. Cleaning room, $15.25. Removing garbage, $10. Washing dishes, $10.50. Vacuuming house, $10. Total owed $65.75. So the story goes, Mom wrote a note in response. For 9 months of carrying you, no charge. The night I sat up and doctored you and prayed for you, no charge. The time and tears and cost over the years, no charge. The advice and knowledge shared and college savings, no charge. Total cost of my love, no charge. Jesus says in today's gospel, quote, I have said these things so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Love one another. It almost sounds like a parent, doesn't it? This is for your good. Empathy is such a gift. And to be truthful, not all of us have had enough from even people close to us. Maybe even our parents. Maybe our mothers. I am grateful myself, but not everybody is. So too, I loved my mother for her distaste of judgmentalism. Again, her empathy was strong enough, usually, to overcome judgment. Apparently, she was misjudged to try to avoid doing so. From the news this week, it was May 6th, 1935, that Franklin Roosevelt created the WPA. Remember? WPA? The Works Progress Administration, the New Deal's most expensive agency. From 1935 to 1943, about $11 billion, employing 8.5 million out-of-work people for 1.4 million projects, infrastructure, right? Public buildings, we've seen the artwork, right, on buildings, parks, to keep citizens employed and putting food on the table. But there were critics, not for entirely unfounded reason, who gave the WPA nicknames like "We Poke Along" or "We Play Around." Employees were derided for being shovel leaners back in the day. John Steinbeck, looking back at the 30s, wrote these words, quote, "It was the fixation of businessmen that the WPA did nothing but lean on shovels. I had an uncle who was particularly irritated at shovel leaning. When he poo-pooed my contention that shovel leaning was necessary, I bet him $5, which I didn't have, that he couldn't shovel sand for 15 timed minutes without stopping. He said a man should give a good day's work and grabbed a shovel. At the end of 3 minutes, his face was red. At 6, he was staggering. And before 8 minutes were up, his wife stopped him to save him from apoplexy. And he never mentioned shovel leaning again. Quote, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Love is not conditional. This is not to say that frustration and anger are not helpful. Number 3, with my mom, I'm grateful for her frustration and her anger. I didn't enjoy it, but I'm grateful for it. Again, 8 kids, 20 years from the youngest to the oldest. Not a lot of extra means, if you know what I mean. So a lot of stress and vexation. She would lose it because she found she sometimes couldn't cope. And I do remember that one day she said, if I see that toy on the floor right in this hallway again, I will break it into pieces. I did not remember that. And the next time she did, and I was shocked. But I did not forget that moment, as you can tell. Don't leave things on the floor. So I loved her for her toughness, if you will. I could see her struggle and fight not to be defeated. Not to be defeated by the worry, or the fatigue and the challenges. I saw her toughness again in her empathy for others, inspired to stick up for those in dire straits, those who were hurting. So when people weren't behaving, her husband, her children, whether they were children or young adults, she called them out and she directed them to behave in a different way, to consider what was the right thing, the helpful thing. And it was because we knew that she loved us that we cared about changing. We knew that that love was there, right? The expectation was to move past mistakes. Mistakes were redeemable. And isn't this the core of our Christian journey? That mistakes are redeemable. To continue to aspire to be better, even though we may feel unworthy, or even though someone seems to be judging us to be unworthy. We are aware of the failure of people in our lives, including mothers, to truly embody love without a predominant critique which is debilitating. But I'm reminded here of the recent statements in the news from some American Catholic bishops who questioned recently whether anyone who supports abortion rights should be receiving communion when they go to the rail, which journalists, of course, picked up on as a critique of progressive politicians like our president. Even though more than 50% of Catholics in survey believe abortion, as serious as it is, should be legal. But what struck me in this conversation were the words of Jesuit commentator Reverend Thomas Neese, quote, "What about the other issues? What about politicians who lie about the results of the election and encourage their followers to overturn the will of the people? What about politicians who support racism through voter suppression laws? What about politicians who fight against policies to deal with global warming? What about politicians who deny refuge to those fleeing oppression and want, who do nothing to save those dying in the desert or drowning at sea? What about politicians who deny Medicaid to the poor? Everyone has their list of people who should be denied communion. Who is to decide?" End quote. So we might say that everyone is unworthy to receive communion, right? And everyone is called to aspire to be worthy, in spite of never being perfectly so. And that's where love comes in. Love, love, love. Because that was Jesus' mission, was it not? Was it not? Quote, "I am giving you these commandments so that you may love one another." End quote. The commandments serve at the literal mercy of love. Love is first. Love is last. Love is it. Love is the answer. In the Acts reading today, they came to the conclusion way back then that of course we should baptize Gentiles if they're seeking to join this community of love. And as I understand it, in Jesus' life, any excommunication goes against love. So if your parents or people in your life, your father, your mother, taught you differently, that love is conditional, let me be evangelical and invite you to turn to Christ and be redeemed, right? Even if that message, that love is conditional, was based on someone's physical absence or emotional absence. It's not about you being unworthy. It's about those people who cared for you failing to move past their own unworthiness. They didn't have the capacity, perhaps. But what about us? No. So be saved, friends, says the Episcopal priest. Be saved by your surrender to God's love, to Christ's call to surrender all to love by moving past judgment, moving past understandable frustration and hunger, and use your spiritual toughness, not only to survive, but to thrive, to love sacrificially, empathically, and make a difference with your life. So I want to end today with a Mary Oliver poem that was in Journey with Jesus this week. And she was born in 1935, the same year as the New Deal. It's called Of Love. I have been in love more times than one, thank the Lord. Sometimes it was lasting, whether active or not. Sometimes it was all but ephemeral, maybe only an afternoon, but not less real for that. They stay in my mind, these beautiful people, or anyway, beautiful people to me, of which there are so many. You and you and you, whom I had the fortune to meet, or maybe missed. Love, love, love. It was the core of my life, from which, of course, comes the word for the heart. And oh, have I mentioned that some of them were men, and some were women, and some, now carry my revelation with you, were trees, or places, or music flying above the names of their makers, or clouds, or the sun, which was for certain, who looked so faithfully into my eyes every morning. So I imagine such love of the world, its fervency, its shining, its innocence, and hunger to give of itself. I imagine this is how it began. In the name of Christ, amen.